I thought I knew my nephew until he moved in with me. Hello, Reddit. I'm Eleanor, a 58-year-old woman living a relatively quiet life in the suburbs. I've never been much of a storyteller, but recent events have left me with an experience too poignant not to share. Bear with me. This is a long one. It started on a quiet evening in early autumn. The kind of evening where the air is crisp, the sky is a soft gradient of amber and indigo, and the silence in the house feels more oppressive than peaceful. I had just finished tidying up after dinner, a lonely ritual in my now empty nest, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Standing on my doorstep was Michael, my nephew. Taller than I remembered, his shoulders broader, and his face sharper with the passage of years. He carried a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and had an expression that teetered between ease and hesitation. "Hey, Aunt Ellie," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered, but still familiar. Michael and I hadn't seen each other in nearly a decade. Life had a way of pulling us in different directions after his parents, my sister and her husband, moved to the West Coast. I'd send him Christmas cards. He'd sometimes reply with a quick text. That was the extent of our relationship. But there he was, standing in my doorway, looking both like the boy I once knew and a stranger all at once. "Mind if I crash here for a bit?" he asked, the hint of a sheepish smile tugging at his lips. I nodded, ushering him inside without asking too many questions. Something in his eyes told me he wasn't ready to explain why he'd shown up unannounced, and I didn't want to push. Not yet. Having Michael around was strange at first. The house had grown so quiet in recent years, and his presence was like a gust of wind through a long-sealed window. He filled the space in ways I hadn't realized I needed. The first evening, I reheated some leftover stew while Michael dropped his duffel bag in the guest room. He joined me in the kitchen, leaning casually against the counter, as if we'd done this 1,000 times before. "Smells good," he said, his tone easy but appreciative. Over dinner, we talked, or rather, he talked. He told me about his job in the city, his roommates, and his attempts to find himself amidst the chaos of adulthood. He glossed over the specifics of why he'd left, but I didn't press. Instead, I listened, savoring the sound of his voice filling the space that had grown so still over the years. Michael had always been an observant kid, and it seemed he hadn't lost that quality. He noticed the little things, how I always made tea after dinner, how the photos on the wall hadn't changed since his last visit, how I kept my hands busy when I was nervous. "You don't have to fuss, Aunt Ellie," he said one evening, catching me mid-clean as he set his empty plate on the counter. "It's a habit," I replied, smiling faintly. "It's okay to just sit, he said, his tone teasing but kind. It was such a simple statement, but it stayed with me. How long had it been since someone reminded me to just be? In the days that followed, we fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings began with the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of Michael shuffling into the kitchen, his hair messy from sleep. He'd pour us both a cup, sliding mine across the table without a word. It was a small gesture, but it felt intimate in a way I hadn't expected. Afternoons were quieter. I'd catch up on chores or read by the window while Michael went out for long walks. Sometimes he'd return with a loaf of fresh bread or a bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked up from the local market. Evenings were my favorite. We'd settle in the living room, a movie playing in the background as we shared stories from our vastly different lives. Michael had a way of making even mundane moments feel significant, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations. One night, after a few glasses of wine, Michael finally opened up. He'd left his job and his apartment in the city after a falling out with his boss and a breakup with his long-term girlfriend. He'd felt unmoored, unsure of where to go or what to do next. "I didn't know who else to turn to," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad you came here," I said, meaning every word. As the weeks passed, our bond deepened. We revisited old photo albums, laughing at the awkward hairstyles and questionable fashion choices of the past. We cooked together, trying new recipes and rediscovering old family favorites. We even tackled some long overdue home projects, like repainting the guest room and clearing out the attic. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of tension, like when Michael's restlessness clashed with my need for order, or when I accidentally touched a nerve by mentioning his ex. Still, those moments only made our connection stronger. We learned to navigate each other's boundaries, to communicate openly and honestly in ways we hadn't before. One particularly memorable evening, Michael noticed my old piano gathering dust in the corner of the living room. I hadn't played in years, but he convinced me to sit down and give it a try. To my surprise, he joined in, singing along with a surprisingly good voice. Music became another way for us to connect, and we spent several evenings playing and singing together. Another time, he found an old box of puzzles in the attic and insisted we try one. What started as a simple pastime turned into hours of laughter and storytelling as we pieced together not just the puzzle, but fragments of our lives we'd never shared before. The real turning point came during a visit to the local park. We'd gone for a walk around the pond, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. Michael stopped suddenly, staring out at the water. "Do you ever feel like you're just drifting?" he asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "All the time," I replied, surprising even myself with the honesty of my answer. That moment felt like a bridge between us, a shared understanding that transcended age and experience. Eventually, Michael decided it was time to move on. He'd found a new job and an apartment in a nearby city. On his last morning here, we shared a quiet breakfast, neither of us saying much. As he loaded his bag into the car, he turned to me and said, "Thank you, Aunt Ellie, for everything." "Anytime," I replied, hugging him tightly. Watching him drive away, I felt a mix of emotions: pride, sadness, and an overwhelming gratitude for the time we'd shared. Life has returned to its usual rhythm, but the house feels different now. Michael's presence has left a lasting imprint, and I find myself cherishing the memories we made. His visit reminded me of the importance of connection, of being present in the moment, and of the unexpected beauty that can arise from life's challenges. If you made it this far, thank you for reading. I'd love to hear your thoughts or your own stories of reconnecting with loved ones. Life is too short to let those bonds slip away.